Hello everyone. I'm really glad you're here. Tonight, I want to help you let go of the day and ease into rest. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, and it means a lot to be part of your nightly routine. So if you haven't already, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It truly helps. Now, settle in, close your eyes, and let's begin. Story 1. The Abandoned Neighborhood Encounter. It was 2007, and the weight of the recession still hung in the air like a heavy fog. My best friend and I, both in our early 20s, were sharing an apartment in a moderately sized metro area. Neither a bustling city nor a quiet town, but somewhere in between. Just behind our apartment complex, a short trail wound through a thin stretch of woods, leading into an eerie, deserted neighborhood of single-family homes. Rows of houses stood silently under the midday sun, almost surreal in their emptiness. The developer, likely defeated by financial constraints, had built a pristine road into the subdivision before abandoning the project altogether. With no stores or businesses nearby, the area was devoid of life, though not overtly creepy, just quiet, unfinished, and forgotten by time. We were young, curious, and spirited, often strolling through this neighborhood during our free daytime hours. Retail jobs gave us odd schedules, and we loved the peaceful oddity of the place. We'd bring blankets to a grassy field near one of the larger homes and lie under the open sky, talking and laughing, sometimes sneaking a joint just to feel the breeze a little deeper. That particular day was radiant, late summer or early fall. I can't remember which, but the air was golden, the sky a brilliant blue, and the mood carefree. We had no sense of foreboding as we walked a cracked gravel road, side by side, immersed in conversation and the soft rustle of trees whispering secrets above us. That tranquility fractured the moment we saw a car approaching. A small blue hatchback was crawling up the path toward us, and though it wasn't the first time we'd seen vehicles in the area, something about this one unsettled me. The car passed slowly, revealing two people inside, though neither of us got a good look at them. The driver, from what little I glimpsed, was a white male with brown hair wearing a blue and white raglan shirt. The passenger remained a shadow, almost deliberately obscured. They didn't acknowledge us. The car disappeared over a small hill, gravel crunching beneath its tires, leaving us puzzled but not alarmed. That would change quickly. Just a few minutes later, the car returned, rolling past us in the opposite direction. It emerged from behind, the tires crunching rhythmically as it moved, then disappeared once more over the hill. We figured they must have gotten turned around. There wasn't much to see here after all, but as we crested that same hill, everything shifted. The car was there again, sitting idly in the middle of the road ahead of us, its brake lights glowing red against the dusty grey. We both stopped walking. The driver was alone. The passenger, who had most certainly been there before, was gone. I stood there staring, my stomach twisting in cold dread. A silent alarm rang inside my chest. My friend broke the stillness first. "Wasn't there someone else in the car?" she asked. Her voice was soft but taut with fear. I nodded. The realization that someone, perhaps someone dangerous, had exited the car behind us, unaccounted for, hit me like a wave. We looked around, eyes scanning the overgrown yards and empty windows, searching for any sign of movement. The woods behind us were still, and yet, the sensation of being watched clung to us like mist. I remember the feeling of paralysis, of being suspended between instinct and disbelief. The car ahead was waiting, idling, as though it knew we had nowhere else to go, and whatever had been inside it might now be lurking behind us. Then the car began to move in reverse and fast. It jolted backward down the road, straight toward us. That was when instinct screamed louder than hesitation, and our bodies finally obeyed. We sprinted into the yard of one of the abandoned houses, cutting through tall grass and brush, thorns snagging at our clothes as we dove into the woods. We didn't stop to look back. We didn't speak. We just ran, hearts pounding, breaths ragged, crashing through the trees with blind urgency, until we burst out on the far side of the apartment complex. We didn't slow until we were safely inside our building, doors locked, windows bolted, hearts still racing from the terror that had silently stalked us through the midday calm. I never learned who was in that car or what their intentions had been. I don't know where the passenger vanished to, or why the driver waited so patiently, so eerily, on that forgotten road. All I know is that I've never walked in that neighborhood again. Something about that day left a mark on me, a kind of invisible scar that flinches every time I pass a car idling just a little too long. There's a look people have when they're planning something, a tension in the air that hums just out of range, and now I trust it. Whatever game they were playing, we escaped by seconds, maybe less, maybe luck. But something deep in me still wonders what would have happened if we'd hesitated even a moment longer. My friend and I talked about it for weeks afterward, both trying to reason with ourselves, to rationalize the strangeness of it. Maybe the passenger had gotten out to take a walk. Maybe they were just lost. Maybe it was all a coincidence, an eerie, perfectly timed coincidence. But deep down, neither of us believed that. The way the car appeared, the way it disappeared, the missing person, the reversal, the feeling, all of it painted a picture that neither of us wanted to finish. We began walking different routes. Then we stopped walking at all. We started driving to the gym instead. We found safer places to lounge. And quietly we both made a pact never to return. Sometimes I dream about that street. In the dreams it's silent and sunlit, but the car is always there, just waiting. The passenger never has a face, and I never reach the top of the hill. I always wake up before I see what's waiting on the other side. Even now, so many years later, I feel a chill at the memory. The kind of chill that slips under your skin and settles in your bones. It whispers things you can't quite hear and brings shadows to the edges of your sight. It reminds you that sometimes the scariest things don't happen at night. Sometimes they find you in the daylight, on a walk you've taken a dozen times before, on a road that should have been quiet. If there's one lesson I took from that day, it's this: trust your instincts. That gut feeling that tells you something's wrong. Even when everything looks normal, it's not paranoia. It's survival. The world has its darker corners, its nearly invisible dangers, and sometimes they appear in the most ordinary places. We didn't go looking for trouble that day. We were just two girls enjoying the sun, but trouble found us. Or maybe it was hunting. Either way, we were lucky, so very lucky, and I hope, wherever that car went after we ran, it didn't find someone less fortunate, because whatever their intentions were, they weren't good. Of that much I'm certain. Story 2. The EMT in the last words. In the early days of my career as a firefighter and EMT, I witnessed many events that shook me to the core, but none would leave such a permanent imprint as that one call during my first year on the job. My partner and I had only recently completed training, both of us fresh out of school, and full of hope and purpose. We were dispatched to a call about a fall. 2 young men had gone hiking and attempted to scale a jagged rock face. One of them had lost his footing and landed hard, impaled on a tree stump that jutted up like a cruel needle from the earth. The call came in like any other, but what we found when we arrived was something you never really prepare for, no matter how many classes you take or scenarios you run. He was barely conscious, a boy not much younger than myself, trembling uncontrollably as he lay against the stump. Blood pooled beneath him, soaking into the dirt, dark and alarming in its quantity. I dropped to my knees beside him and began trying to slow the bleeding, wrapping gauze, applying pressure, doing all the things I had drilled into muscle memory. My partner was already on the radio, calling for a medevac chopper, knowing instinctively that time was not on our side. The boy's eyes met mine, wide and glazed with shock. He was scared, terrified in that primal, soul-deep way that only someone inches from death can be. And then he asked me the question that still echoes in my head. Am I gonna die? I lied. Of course I lied. I told him we were doing everything we could, that help was on the way, and that he needed to stay with me. I asked him his name, asked about his family, told him to keep talking. He didn't say anything for a long 30 seconds, and then he whispered, I don't want to die. That was the moment the air around us seemed to shift, as if the weight of mortality had pressed down on both of us. This wasn't just a patient, this was a kid. Someone who had plans, dreams, maybe a crush, maybe a test he hadn't studied for. He was depending on me. And I felt, for the first time, the crushing burden of that responsibility. Despite everything we did, he didn't make it. The medevac was too far out, and even if it had arrived in time, the blood loss was catastrophic. We transported his body off the trail, silent in our shared heartbreak. Later, I learned the helicopter had been grounded due to weather. There was nothing else that could have been done. But knowing that didn't make it easier. I ended up in counseling after that call. It wasn't mandatory. I chose to go because something inside me had shifted. It's one thing to train for trauma. It's another to hold the hand of someone as they pass from life to death and know in your gut that they died afraid. Despite that experience, I'm still here, still doing the job. I've grown stronger since then, wiser, maybe more hardened, but I never forgot his face. Every time I'm dispatched to a fall, I remember him. I remember how cold the air felt on my skin, how his blood soaked through my gloves, how his eyes pleaded for hope. It's a kind of haunting, but not the ghost story kind. It's the sort of memory that doesn't shout or scream, but simply lingers, like a shadow that stretches out beside you on the road. It's always there, just out of sight, just behind your left shoulder, whispering reminders of how fragile life truly is. There were other calls after that, heart attacks, overdoses, house fires. Some ended in relief, others in devastation, but no call ever carried the same emotional weight as that first one. It was the moment I realized what it really meant to be an MT. It's not about the uniform or the adrenaline or the status. It's about stepping into someone's worst day and trying, with everything you've got, to make it better. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, but you do it anyway, again and again, because someone has to, and because maybe, just maybe your presence makes their last moment a little less alone. People often ask me how I do this job, how I sleep at night, how I deal with the pain and the grief, and the images that never really leave. I don't always have a good answer. Some nights are harder than others. Some days I stare at my coffee and wonder if I'm really cut out for this. But then I remember the times I made a difference. The child whose asthma attack I stopped. The grandfather who made it to his granddaughter's graduation because we got there in time. The mother who squeezed my hand as I told her she was going to be okay. Those moments, small as they seem, are the ones that light a path through the darkness. It would be easy to let that first loss break me. And for a time it nearly did. I became quieter. I distanced myself. I questioned everything, but something deeper called me back. Something rooted in empathy and stubbornness, and a belief that even in a world full of pain, we can still choose to stand beside each other in the storm. That kid's voice, his plea not to die, became part of the reason I kept showing up. I couldn't save him, but maybe I could save the next one. Maybe I could hold someone else's hand and tell them they weren't alone, and maybe that would be enough. Now, years later, I still feel the weight of that night, but I carry it differently. It's not a burden anymore, it's a vow. A silent promise to every person I treat that I will give them everything I have, that I will not flinch or falter. that I will honor the memory of those I couldn't save by giving all of myself to those I can, and maybe in doing so, I give that kid's story a little more meaning. Maybe his fear wasn't in vain. Maybe his final words helped shape a medic who will never again take a moment for granted. So if you ever wonder about the people behind the sirens, know this: we are more than our uniforms. We are witnesses to the fragility of life. We are keepers of final moments. And sometimes, in the quiet after the chaos, we remember the trembling hands, the whispered fears, and the fading breath. And we carry them with us, not as ghosts, but as reminders to listen, to care, and to never stop showing up. Because for someone out there, we might be the only thing standing between hope and silence. Story 3. The shadow at the foot of my bed. There's something about childhood memories that linger like fog on a cool morning. Thin, quiet, and impossible to shake. My childhood home was filled with laughter, warmth, and the ordinary bustle of family life. But it was also filled with something else, something that crept along the baseboards and whispered through the walls. At first it was subtle, a strange creak in the middle of the night, pans rattling when no one was in the kitchen, a low moan that we all dismissed as the pipes or the wind. But as I approached 10 years old, things began to escalate, slowly transforming our home into a place of eerie wonder, and for me, personal dread. The living and dining rooms were one big open space, connected without any clear border. The dining room had a push-button dimmer switch, one of those that clicked loudly when engaged. It couldn't be nudged on or off accidentally. One evening my stepmother was out of town, so it was just my dad, my sister, and me watching TV. All of us had our backs to the dining room, when without warning, we heard the sharp click of that dimmer switch. The light came on. My sister and I turned toward the sound at the same time. My dad looked curious but not scared. I, on the other hand, felt a cold wave roll up my spine. My stomach tightened. Something about it wasn't right. We had all heard the switch click. We had all seen the light come on, and none of us had moved. My dad inspected the switch, offering some casual explanation about electrical issues, but the sound was mechanical. It required physical pressure to engage. My sister and I shared a glance that said we both knew better. In the months that followed, other strange things began to occur, but they happened sporadically, just far enough apart that we never really knew if they were real or imagined. Sometimes, before I fell asleep, I'd see a shadowy figure enter my room. It was never aggressive. It never touched me. It just stood there, in the corner, or at the foot of my bed. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe a child talking about shadow people in the night? As time passed, the figure became bolder. I'd wake up and see it near the ceiling, still and silent, like it was suspended in place. Its shape became clearer over time. It looked like a man, only wrong. Chunks of its face were missing, as if eroded. The eyes were black voids, and the nose had receded into the empty rot of decay. Its mouth was a hollow space of darkness. Yet, strangely, I didn't fear it at first. It wasn't until it began getting closer, until I could feel the weight of its presence hovering inches from my face in the darkness, that fear finally began to take hold. I remember waking one night to find it lying beside me, facing me, unmoving. I could feel its breath, if breath is even the right word. It didn't make a sound, didn't shift or reach out. It only stared. I closed my eyes, opened them again, and it would still be there. My body never froze from fear in the clinical sense, but I chose not to move. I would lie still, watching, waiting. Sometimes it would disappear back into the shadows. Other times I would fall asleep first, but every visit left behind the same chill, like something had brushed against the fabric of my reality and pulled it slightly out of shape. Then came the scratches. I'd wake with fresh marks on my stomach, legs, or back, always 3, long, shallow cuts that burned slightly but never bled much. I bit my nails to the quick, so it wasn't me. I never tossed or thrashed. The worst one slashed diagonally across my chest, from my shoulder down to my hip. I never told anyone. I couldn't. Part of me was afraid it would stop if I acknowledged it. Another part was terrified that if I did tell, it might get worse. I just lived with it. The shadow, the visits, the silence. The final encounter changed everything. I woke up to see the figure at the side of my bed again, but this time it wasn't still. It stood tall now, looming like it had grown larger overnight. I tried to move, but my limbs were impossibly heavy, like gravity had turned to concrete. Then slowly it leaned forward. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I could only watch as it began to dissolve into me, not in a metaphorical sense, but literally. Its body faded into my own, like ink dispersing in water. And then it was gone. From that night forward, I never saw it again. Years passed, and life moved on. Then, one Christmas, my family gathered at my sister's house. We had a few drinks and fell into nostalgia, reminiscing about the old house and the strange things that happened there. Laughing, my parents teased us about our haunted house stories. I hadn't mentioned the shadow figure to anyone, not once, but then my sister turned to me and said, "Remember the figure that used to come into our rooms? The face?" My heart froze. I asked, "The one with no nose and black eyes and mouth?" Her face turned pale. "Yes," she whispered. "Exactly that one." We talked briefly, validating each other's memories with matching descriptions. It was no longer something I imagined. The real horror wasn't the figure, or the scratches, or even that final night. The real horror was the confirmation that someone else had seen it too, that it had chosen both of us. The face we described was identical. The silence we endured had been shared, and that perhaps was the most terrifying truth of all. That thing was real. It lived in our home. It visited us both, and we had never spoken of it until that one random night years later. There's something deeply unsettling about that kind of validation, when your worst fears turn out to be someone else's too. To this day, I don't sleep with my feet uncovered. I still sometimes wake with the sensation of being watched, and my first instinct is to scan the shadows, to look for those black empty eyes. I don't know what that thing was or what it wanted, but I know this. It left its mark, and I carry it quietly, like a faded scar on the soul. Not everyone believes in the things that visit us in the dark, but some of us don't need to believe. We remember. Story 4. The Gas Station Stranger. I was 21 when I finally gained the trust of my mother to make the long drive alone to visit my family in another state. It was a 5.5-hour journey through winding highways and unfamiliar roads. The idea of being on the open road, music up and a little smoke to ease my mind, felt like the kind of freedom you wait years to taste. I was halfway through the drive, feeling mellow and peaceful, when the need for snacks and gas made me pull off the highway into a station I didn't recognize. It was quiet, too quiet, in hindsight, and that's when the entire tone of my drive shifted from relaxed to razor-edged. There were maybe 1 or 2 other cars in the lot when I arrived. The gas station was one of those slightly larger ones with a convenience store and an attached antique shop. An odd pairing, but not unusual for backroad America. I parked at the pump, locked the doors out of habit, and headed inside. A small sign on the counter read, "Be right back," but I didn't think much of it. I wandered through the aisles, picking up a snack and a drink, and then moved to the coolers at the back to choose something cold. That's when I noticed him. A man in his late 20s, loitering in the far side of the store, turned and looked directly at me. I felt it before I even fully registered it. Something was wrong. At first, I tried to shrug it off. Maybe he was just another customer. But as I walked to a different fridge, he followed, opening the door next to mine. It wasn't just coincidental proximity. He moved when I moved, stayed when I stayed. Then he smiled. A strange, tight-lipped smile that didn't reach his eyes. He said hi in a way that felt off, like he was testing something. I nodded politely and shifted away, opting for a tea I didn't really want just to get away from him. I approached the counter, hoping someone had returned to work the register, but no one was there, and the man followed me again, this time holding a single item, some kind of jerky stick, something he clearly hadn't picked up from the coolers at all. He stood behind me far too close. I could feel his presence in a visceral way, his breath brushing the back of my neck, the proximity of his body igniting every alarm in my brain. Still, I didn't panic. I've never had the luxury of innocence. A hard childhood had trained me to read people and listen to my gut. My instincts weren't just whispering now. They were screaming. I started to call out for someone, anyone, but no one came. The man behind me was texting, glancing toward the entrance repeatedly, like he was waiting for something or someone. It was the moment I realized he wasn't alone that my fear truly blossomed into terror. I left the drink on the counter and turned, walking briskly out the door. He followed. I could hear his footsteps quicken as mine did. I broke into a run. I felt a hand graze the edge of my jacket, a clawing attempt to stop me, but momentum and adrenaline won out. I reached my car, yanked the door open, slammed it shut, and locked it in one frantic motion. As I started the engine, I caught a glimpse of him in my side mirror, and two more figures rounding the corner of the building, sprinting toward my vehicle. All three ran at me. I floored it, tires screeching as I narrowly missed the corner of the building and sped back toward the highway, heart pounding in my chest like it wanted out. It took a while for my breathing to steady, and even longer for my mind to process what had almost happened. I called the police once I found a safe spot. I reported the incident and told them about the missing cashier. The thought that something might have happened to them haunted me. When the authorities arrived at the gas station, the men were gone, vanished as if they'd never been there. I don't know what they were planning, but I've played the scenario in my mind enough times to know it wasn't good. A lone woman in a remote gas station with no witnesses, no help. What that was, it wouldn't have ended well for me. After that day, I started carrying a knife on long drives. I took a self-defense course and stopped thinking of myself as just a girl on the road. I became someone aware, alert, ready. It's a strange thing, realizing how quickly the ordinary can spiral into the unthinkable. One minute you're reaching for a bottle of iced tea, and the next you're running for your life. It made me rethink everything. Where I stop, how I scan a room, how long I linger. I learned the hard way that danger doesn't announce itself. It waits quietly, behind a jerky stick and a smile that doesn't belong. There's a part of me that still shudders when I stop at a quiet gas station. My eyes always scan the corners. I never let myself get distracted. And I never ignore that inner voice again, the one that prickles your skin and whispers, "Get out." We're taught to be polite, to smile back, to give people the benefit of the doubt. But sometimes, the cost of being polite is far too high. That man wasn't just being friendly, and I wasn't just paranoid. What saved me wasn't luck, it was intuition, sharpened by a life that had already taught me what fear smells like. I don't tell this story to scare anyone, but to remind people that real horror doesn't always come with thunder or monsters or ghosts. Sometimes it wears jeans and texts on a phone while pretending to choose a drink. Sometimes it waits for you to lower your guard, to believe you're safe, before it pounces. So trust your instincts, even when they seem inconvenient. Lock your doors, stay aware, and never let anyone tell you that your gut is just being dramatic. Because one day it might be the only thing that saves your life. Story 5. Alone on the tram. Living in Prague had a rhythm all its own. The cobbled streets, the laughter of tourists, the scent of roasted chestnuts in winter. It was a city painted in stories. I had been there a year, balancing a day job teaching third grade with a night job doing security at a bar in the city centre. It was a routine I had grown used to, even if the nights were often long, and the city's after-hours crowd unpredictable. Most weekends, I would finish my shift at 3 or 4 in the morning, then take the tram back to my flat in Zitskov, headphones in, eyes tired. It felt safe enough, until the night I realized how quickly that sense of safety can vanish. That night had been uneventful. A few rowdy tourists, a couple of bar fights barely worth mentioning, and finally, a quiet ride home awaited me. I boarded the late tram near Wenceslas Square, as I usually did, and found a spot near the back. My phone had died, but I kept my headphones in anyway, a silent shield to avoid conversation with drunken strangers. The tram was mostly empty, except for a group of 7 British men, loud and unfiltered, clearly there for a stag party. I tried to ignore them. I had grown used to tourists. Most were harmless, but there was something about the way this group looked at me that made my skin crawl. I heard one of them, through the drunken laughter, make a comment that turned my blood cold. I'd screw that Harry Potter-looking girl. One said, like she'd have a choice. That was followed by raucous laughter and high fives. Another one asked, how do we even know it's a girl? And they all burst into laughter again. I didn't react. I didn't look up. I kept my eyes glued to my Kindle and pretended not to understand English, but inside I was screaming. I wanted to get off the tram, but I was still 2 stops away from home. I thought foolishly that if I just waited it out, I could disappear into the night. My stop came. I stood up and stepped off the tram into the empty street. My apartment was just a few blocks away. I told myself they'd keep riding, head off to a club or hotel, and that would be the end of it, but they followed. I could hear them behind me, laughing, joking. My pulse quickened. I crossed to the other side of the road, a little trick I'd learned to test if someone was trailing me. They crossed too. I picked up my pace. So did they. Every part of me was now on high alert. My keys were clenched in my hand, the longest one threaded between my fingers like a weapon. By the time I reached the 3rd block, they had closed the distance. I didn't want to run. I didn't want to show fear, but my instinct screamed otherwise. I turned sharply and bolted down a side street, sprinting toward my apartment. The sound of their laughter behind me was replaced by heavy footsteps. I fumbled with my keys, slammed through the front door, and locked it behind me. Even though the door was secure, I threw the deadbolt for good measure and ran up the stairs to my flat, locking myself inside. Only then did I collapse on the floor, breathless, heart pounding in my ears. Through the open window of my apartment, I could still hear them. "Where'd you go?" one of them called out. They lingered for a while, circling the building, shouting things I won't repeat. Eventually they moved on. But the damage had already been done. That night didn't end with an attack, but it didn't need to. The fear they instilled, the sheer vulnerability I felt, left a scar just as deep. I sat in my room for hours afterward, unable to sleep, wondering how close I had come to something far worse. My sense of safety, which I had carefully built over months of independence, was shattered in an instant. People don't talk enough about the kind of fear that doesn't leave bruises. The kind that sits quietly in your bones and makes you check every window twice. The kind that makes you change your route home, or avoid eye contact, or keep keys clutched in a fist like a hidden blade. I started carrying pepper spray after that. My boyfriend, who I told everything to later, bought me a knife for my birthday. Not exactly romantic, but necessary. I never took the tram that late again, not alone. I learned that confidence doesn't always equal safety, and that sometimes you have to take your own protection into your hands. The most haunting part of that night was how casual they were. how it was all a game to them, an evening of laughs and drinks and stories to tell back home. For me, it was a night that could have ended in a headline, and they'd never have to answer for it, because in their eyes they were just joking, just being lads. But to me it wasn't a joke. It was real. It was personal. It was fear, vivid and visceral, and it changed me. That's why I share this story, not for sympathy, but for awareness, because too many women have stories like this, tucked away in the back of their minds. Some end worse. Some don't end at all. We live in a world that asks us to be vigilant, to be smart, to protect ourselves, as if we are the ones doing something wrong by simply existing. But maybe if enough of us speak, maybe if the stories are told, then someone out there might think twice before turning a night of drinking into a night of terror for someone else. Story 6. The Cemetery Stalker. Back when I was 17, weekends were for chasing shadows. A few close friends and I had a habit of driving deep into the woods of eastern Connecticut to visit Union Cemetery, a place whispered about in local legends, rumored to be one of the most haunted cemeteries in the region. We weren't exactly ghost hunters, just curious kids with a camera and too much courage. The roads out there were long, winding and cloaked in trees. Streetlights were sparse, and houses appeared only once every mile or two. Even before you stepped into the cemetery, the drive alone felt like entering another world, a world where something ancient waited in the dark. One night it was just me and two friends. We set out around 2 a.m, determined to walk the cemetery's edge without being caught trespassing. As we turned onto the final stretch of road, a single lane that cut through dense forest, we suddenly noticed a car behind us. It seemed to come out of nowhere, its headlights snapping on just a few feet away, flooding our rearview mirror with light. It was driving aggressively, close enough that I couldn't even see the glow of its headlights anymore. I slowed down, unsure if it was a police officer or just a reckless local. But whoever it was, they slowed down too, exactly in sync. We sped up, taking curves with a little more speed than we should have. Still, the car stayed on us, mimicking every move, every turn. There was something mechanical about the way it followed, like it wasn't just driving, it was hunting. The decision to avoid pulling into the cemetery was instant. We didn't want to be cornered there. Just past the cemetery was a rotary, a small circular intersection with roads branching in 3 directions. We entered it, thinking maybe we could lose the car. But each time we circled, the car stayed with us. First lap, still behind us. Second lap, still there. Third, fourth, fifth, the same. By the 5th circle, panic was taking over. The car kept an eerie distance, not trying to pass, not trying to communicate, just trailing us in this endless loop of asphalt. We couldn't make out the driver. The windshield was too dark. We could see the shape of the car though, an old model, maybe late 80s or early 90s, something with sharp angles and faded paint. It was like it had crawled out of the past just to find us. We made a snap decision to break the pattern. I yanked the wheel and veered down one of the side roads, hoping to shake it off. The car followed. I floored it. For a moment it seemed like we were gaining distance. The headlights began to fade behind us. Then they disappeared altogether. No light, no sound. Just darkness. It didn't make sense. There were no turn-offs, nowhere it could have gone. Then, a minute later, the headlights came back on. Closer. Much closer. As if it had been right behind us all along. It repeated this 3 more times, vanishing into the black, then reappearing like a phantom. The tension in the car was unbearable. My friends were silent now, eyes wide, hands gripping whatever they could hold. I could feel the tremble in my arms as I kept driving, trying to outpace something that felt less like a person and more like a presence. In a desperate move, I slammed the brakes. We stopped cold. The car behind us stopped too, just 10 feet back, headlights glaring. There was no movement from inside. Nothing. Just silence and light. I stared through the mirror, my breath caught somewhere between my chest and throat. Then I floored it, swerving into the nearest driveway I could find, a narrow path that led to a shadowed house tucked in the woods. We killed the engine and waited. Our hearts beat against the silence. No car passed, nothing moved. We waited for 10 long minutes, holding our breath with every creak of the trees. Then, slowly we backed out. The road was empty. No sign of the car, no tire tracks, just night and wind. We didn't speak the whole way home. Something about the encounter had drained us, left us hollow and shaky. The plan to visit the cemetery was abandoned. We never went that night. None of us spoke about the car again in any real way. We joked once or twice about ghosts with engines and phantoms with license plates, but no one laughed. Not really, because deep down we knew we had seen something we couldn't explain. I don't know who was in that car or what was in it. Maybe it was a cruel prank. Maybe someone wanted to scare us. Or maybe, just maybe, we crossed paths with something that wasn't quite human. There's something about the woods in the middle of the night that blurs the line between real and unreal. And I think, sometimes, there are things on those roads that don't want to be seen, that follow you, test you, and vanish without a trace. All I know is that I've never gone back to that cemetery, and I never will. Story 7. The Ghost Town Girl. It started as a dare between cousins, a casual idea on a lazy evening that quickly turned into a nighttime excursion we'd never forget. We had all heard the stories, rumors whispered through family gatherings and online forums, about a nearby ghost town that had become the stuff of local legend, a place where no one lived, yet where people claimed to see a woman and her daughter walking the roadside. Some said phones would die upon entering. Others claimed their cars simply stopped working. My cousin even swore he saw the woman once, her face obscured, her figure vanishing into fog just before his engine stalled. We didn't know what to believe, but we wanted to see for ourselves. There were 7 of us packed into a large van, all in our late teens, giggling and poking fun at each other. We rolled down the dark, winding road, laughing at the idea that some were too scared to come. We said things like ghosts aren't real, and we'll be back in 10 minutes. That laughter stopped the moment we crossed the old bridge into the town's limits. It was like driving into another dimension. A dense fog rolled in suddenly and swallowed the road and trees. Every sound seemed dampened. The only noise was the hum of our engine and the occasional rustle of the van tires over gravel. We didn't speak. It felt like something was listening. We parked a little off the main road, turning the engine off to sit in the thick silence. The windows fogged slightly from our breathing. Beyond the glass, dilapidated houses stood like open eyes watching us. They looked hollow, yet full. I remember the air feeling heavier, not in temperature, but in mood. Something about those abandoned structures didn't feel truly abandoned. It was like the walls remembered too much. We stared out the windows, waiting, listening, daring each other to get out. Then suddenly, without warning, the driver turned the key and started the van again. He didn't speak. His face was pale, hands trembling slightly. He just drove us out of there without saying a word. We pulled into a gas station a few miles away, and that's when he finally spoke. He said he had seen a little girl walking behind one of the houses, slowly making her way toward the van. She didn't look right, her posture, her walk, her presence. It was enough to make him flee without question. A nearby cashier at the gas station overheard us and almost casually asked if we had just come from the ghost town. He said he'd seen her too. That same little girl, that same off-putting walk. That was the moment things stopped feeling like a game. We asked the cashier what people usually did after visiting. He simply suggested we wash the car down. It sounded strange, but something about his tone made us listen. We grabbed the squeegees from the pumps and washed every inch of the van, Top, sides, mirrors, even the undercarriage. We used paper towels to dry it thoroughly. We didn't know what we were cleaning off, only that we needed to. It felt more like a ritual than a task, a way to sever whatever invisible thread might have followed us back. Once done, we sat in the van and debated what to do next. Against our better judgment, or maybe out of a need for closure, we returned. This time, deeper into the ghost town. We parked in the center of town and just sat. The fog had returned, curling in thin strands around the tires and drifting through the dead grass like fingers. For nearly 20 minutes we waited in silence, barely breathing, staring into the darkness, and then we saw her. A small figure in the distance, standing, unmoving. At first it looked like a child, but the longer we looked, the more we saw how wrong she was. Her movements were jerky, disconnected, like limbs on a string. She started crawling, then slowly stood up. But the transition wasn't natural. It was as if something was pulling her upright rather than her body doing it on its own. She vanished. A loud bang hit the side of the van near the driver's door. Then we heard the sound, something crawling under the vehicle, scraping against the metal, dragging itself from front to back. We felt it. We heard it. Then a weight pressed onto the rear bumper. A tap on the back window, light, deliberate. We didn't wait for more. We drove. Fast. Without looking back, we returned to the gas station, this time stepping out and inspecting the vehicle under the harsh white lights. That's when we saw them, handprints smeared across the mirrors and windows. Small, child-sized. A footprint on the bumper. Nothing we had left behind ourselves. We tried to clean them. Paper towels, water, scrubbing. None of it worked. They didn't feel wet. They didn't even smear. They were just there, like shadows that had etched themselves into the metal and glass. We left the van in the gas station lot and called someone to come get us. None of us wanted to ride in it again that night. We spent the next few hours at a Walmart parking lot, talking softly, shaking slightly. By morning, the prints had vanished. We drove home with the sun rising behind us and didn't speak a word for most of the trip. The silence was louder than any explanation. We've never gone back. Even now, years later, none of us joke about that night. We all saw it, we all felt it, and we all remember what it felt like to be watched. Whatever lives in that ghost town, whatever waits behind those broken windows, isn't finished. It just lets you leave. But sometimes I still wonder if it ever really let us go. Maybe it's still out there, watching, waiting, crawling its way back towards someone else's door. Story 8. The draft snake and the man on the stairs. There are things you forget about childhood, shoes you outgrow, teachers whose names fade, games that lose their magic, but some memories stay sharp, like the edge of broken glass. My earliest years were spent in a house not far from a now abandoned psychiatric hospital. My parents both worked there. My mother was a psychiatric nurse, gentle but hardened, and my father worked on the wards that housed the more disturbed patients. These were the men who hurt themselves in ways that made no sense, who swallowed sheets, screamed at empty rooms, and mutilated themselves with quiet obsession. We lived in a house about 500 yards from the hospital. It wasn't supposed to be haunted, but something was always off. When I was 2, my parents said I would laugh hysterically at nothing. I'd sit alone, giggling uncontrollably as if someone had told me the world's funniest joke. They said it wasn't the usual baby laughter. It was more like I was responding to something, or someone. It went on for months. Eventually they began to notice patterns. I would look toward the same corner of the room, or react when the hallway was empty. At the time they chalked it up to imagination. But I remember things they don't. I remember a boy who used to make shadow puppets on the wall with his hands. He'd move his fingers like he was telling a story, and I'd laugh, even when I didn't understand why. I began drawing scenes on the walls beside my bed, always the same imagery. Police cars, crowds of people, a man running, over and over, the same story etched in crayon. My parents didn't think much of it until I turned 5 and my drawings became more detailed. There was always someone being chased, someone scared. One day the boy told me to hide in the cupboard under the stairs. I obeyed. I remember the door closing, the click of the latch from the outside. When my mother found me crying and trapped, she asked how the door had been locked. It only latched from the outside. I said the boy did it. She didn't believe me, but the fear in her eyes said she wanted to. Then came the night that carved itself into my memory with terrifying clarity. I was around 6, just old enough to understand that nightmares usually end when you wake up. Only this wasn't a nightmare. I awoke to a loud bang downstairs, sharp, jarring. I stepped into the hallway, rubbing my eyes, and looked toward the staircase. That's when I saw him, a man, slowly climbing the stairs, not rushing, not hiding, just moving with heavy intention. Draped on the front doorknob was a draft snake, a long fabric roll meant to block cold air. Only now, it was hanging upward, as if caught on something. It swung slightly, then stilled. I stood frozen. The man was halfway up the stairs. I screamed. The man disappeared. Not vanished, not faded, just gone. A voice followed, soft and distant. "Come here." I don't remember what happened next. I passed out. When I woke, I was in my bed, the draft snake still twisted around the doorknob, motionless. I told my parents. They didn't say much, but years later they finally admitted something they had kept from me. Before we moved into that house, a patient from the nearby hospital had escaped. He had come to our house, broken in and taken a child. He kept the boy hidden in a shed behind the hospital for 2 days before anyone found him. They didn't know if he had ever returned. After that night, the boy with the shadow puppets faded away. I don't remember when he stopped visiting. Only that one day I realized I hadn't seen him in a long time, but the fear lingered. I never trusted that staircase again. Even now, whenever I dream, I sometimes see it, the way the light hit the railing, the creak of the 3rd step, the draft snake hanging like a forgotten warning. There are parts of that house still etched into my subconscious, places I avoid in dreams, doors I won't open, windows that reflect things that shouldn't be there. As I grew older, I learned to dismiss those experiences. I focused on school friends growing up, but the memories didn't fade. They just sank deeper. Occasionally, something would trigger them, a creaking step, the click of a cupboard door, and I'd be that 6-year-old again, staring at the empty stairs, waiting for the man to return. I wondered often if the boy who visited me had been real. A ghost? A fragment of trauma? Or maybe just a leftover echo of the hospital next door. But when I close my eyes and remember the way he looked, the way he laughed, and how he locked that cupboard door, I know he was more than imagination. Now, as an adult, I avoid that part of town. The hospital has long since shut down, its windows boarded up, its grounds fenced off. The house is still there though, still quiet, still watching. I sometimes wonder if a new family lives there, if their children draw pictures on the wall or laugh at unseen stories. I wonder if the man still walks those stairs, slow and deliberate. And I wonder if that draft snake still hangs on the doorknob, waiting for another night to swing. Story 9. The meth high stranger at the gas station. It was early evening, just after 5, and the sky still held the last of the daylight when he walked in. I had been working the evening shift at a gas station chain for about a year by then, often manning the register alone between 4 and midnight. The plexiglass shield separating me from customers offered some peace of mind, but there was still a 2 to 3 foot opening between the registers. I had dealt with rude customers, a few shoplifters, and even the occasional late-night drunk, but nothing prepared me for the man who wandered in that day and left a lasting mark on my sense of safety. The moment he entered, something inside me tensed. You know those instincts you can't quite explain? The ones that hum in your chest like distant thunder. That's what this was. His walk was erratic, like he was drifting without direction, his eyes flicking around the store, but never resting. He didn't say anything. He just began to circle, looking at the shelves in a way that told me he wasn't shopping. He wasn't even pretending. Occasionally he would glance up at me. Each time our eyes met, I felt the pulse of warning grow louder. I tried to ignore it. I retreated behind the counter, my hand brushing the emergency call button under the register, just in case. Minutes passed, and the store remained empty except for him. Then, 2 women walked in, laughing and heading straight to the back coolers. A wave of relief washed over me, even as I kept one eye on the man. I quickly grabbed a pen and a scrap of receipt paper. On it, I wrote, "Please stay with me. I need to call the cops." When one of the women approached the counter to pay, I slid it across the plexiglass. Her eyes scanned it quickly, and she nodded, calm but alert. She turned back to her friend, whispering something that made her look up sharply. Then the man moved. He started toward the counter, slow at first, then suddenly with purpose. Just as he reached the edge of the gap, he froze. Outside the window, a police cruiser had pulled into the lot. The woman's friend had slipped out to flag them down. The man must have seen the flashing lights or caught sight of the officer stepping out, because without a word he turned and bolted. The door slammed behind him, the sound sharp in the otherwise quiet store. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding and sank into the stool behind the register, my fingers trembling slightly. The cop entered seconds later, calm and composed, and I began to explain. I told him everything. How the man had come in and stayed far too long without buying anything. How he'd circled the store like a predator watching prey. How close he had gotten, just feet away from stepping behind the counter. The officer nodded, taking it all in. The 2 women remained nearby, offering their own accounts. Then the officer left, saying he'd patrol the area to see if he could spot the man. I didn't expect anything to come of it. People like that vanish into the night like ghosts. But 30 minutes later, the officer returned. He had found him. And what he told me turned my quiet fear into a deep, shuddering realization. The man had been high on meth. In his pocket, he carried a hunting knife. The officer said that based on his condition and behavior, there was little doubt he was looking for someone to rob, or worse, and had the police not arrived when they did, it was likely I would have been the target. He said it plainly, without theatrics. But those words stuck to me like oil. Looking for someone to rob likely would have hurt you. Those were things I'd only heard in other people's stories, never in my own. And suddenly I wasn't just an employee behind the counter. I was someone who had almost become a headline. After the officer left, the store felt colder, the lights harsher. I went through the motions, restocking shelves, cleaning counters, but my mind kept replaying the what-ifs. What if those women hadn't come in? What if I had been too afraid to pass the note? What if the cop had been 5 minutes later? It wasn't just the fear of being hurt. It was the realization of how fragile safety really is. How quickly a normal shift can become something else entirely. I had always thought the plexiglass barrier meant I was protected, that the call button would be enough, but in that moment, neither felt like a guarantee. From that night on, I started locking the front door earlier when I was alone. I kept my phone closer. I told my manager we needed better security, more cameras. I carried pepper spray, tucked deep in my apron pocket. I told myself it was all precautionary, but I knew better. I was trying to take back some sense of control, because once that illusion is shattered, once you come face to face with the fact that someone wanted to hurt you, it changes how you move through the world. You flinch at shadows. You memorize exits. You stop trusting the quiet. It's easy for people to dismiss stories like mine. They say, well, nothing happened. But something did. Something always does. I walked away physically unharmed. Yes, but part of me stayed in that store, frozen in the moment just before he lunged. Part of me still watches that door, waiting. And part of me still hears the sound of his shoes on the tile floor growing closer. If it weren't for two strangers and one timely police cruiser, I might not be here to write this. And so, to those two women, thank you. For listening. For staying. For choosing to act when it mattered most. Story 10. The locked door at Camp Marrow Pines. The summer I turned 15. My parents sent me to Camp Marrow Pines, a rustic sleepaway camp buried deep in the Oregon forest. It was one of those classic places with log cabins, communal mess halls, and strict lights-out rules that no one really followed. The air always smelled like pine and lake water, and the nights were filled with the hum of crickets and the occasional howl from deeper in the woods. I had been there for 2 summers already, but that particular year felt different. Maybe it was the heat that clung to everything, or the way the camp director never seemed to smile, or maybe it was what happened in Cabin 3. Cabin 3 had always been the loner, tucked a little further down the trail, isolated from the others. It was used when the camp overflowed with more kids than usual. That summer it was empty. No one was assigned there. The counselors said it was being fumigated for wasps, but every night, as we walked back to our cabins after dinner, we'd glance over at Cabin 3 and swear we saw a light flicker in the window. No electricity should have been running. No kids were there, but the glow was unmistakable, soft dim, like a lantern swaying behind the curtains. We laughed it off at first. We told ghost stories about the kid who disappeared from that cabin 10 years ago. We made jokes to cover our unease. One night, my bunkmate Tyler dared us to go investigate. We waited until well past curfew, then snuck out with flashlights and hushed giggles. The forest felt heavier at night, the trees darker, their shapes distorted by the moonlight. When we reached Cabin 3, the air felt noticeably colder. The front door was closed but not locked. Tyler pushed it open slowly, the hinges creaking like they hadn't moved in years. The inside was dusty, abandoned, and smelled faintly of mildew and smoke. Our lights scanned over empty bunks, forgotten duffel bags, and a notebook lying open on the floor. I picked it up, flipping through pages filled with uneven handwriting. Entries about voices at night, dreams of someone standing over the bed, and repeated mentions of a knock that never stops. Then, without warning, the door slammed shut behind us. We jumped, spinning around, only to find it locked tight. We tried the handle, pushed, kicked, nothing. We were trapped inside. The flashlight beams jittered with our movements, throwing wild shadows across the walls. Then we heard it. A knock. Just one. Slow, deliberate from the back of the cabin. We froze. Tyler whispered my name, but it sounded distant, like we weren't even in the same room anymore. The knock came again. And then again. 3 times. Always from the same spot, always the same rhythm. We stepped slowly toward the back wall, where a closet stood slightly ajar. Inside the closet was a small hatch, like a crawl space. We pulled it open, revealing a dark hole leading under the cabin. The knocking stopped. Silence returned. Then a breath, not ours. A long, rasping breath echoed from the hole. Tyler dropped his flashlight. In the dark, I felt something brush my ankle. Not a rodent, not wood. Something colder. Something intentional. The door suddenly flung open, slamming against the wall so hard it cracked the wood. No one was there. Just the open door and the wind. We didn't speak. We ran. Straight back to our cabin, locking the door and climbing into our bunks as if hiding under blankets would keep us safe. The next morning we told the head counselor what happened. He looked annoyed, not concerned, said we imagined it, that the door probably stuck and then popped open with pressure. When we asked about the notebook, he said no one had been assigned to that cabin for over 5 years. When we insisted, he walked us there. The cabin door was wide open. The notebook was gone. The room was spotless, not a speck of dust, as if no one had stepped foot in there for decades. But we knew what we'd seen, what we'd felt, and we didn't go near cabin 3 again for the rest of the summer. That night, I found something tucked into my sleeping bag. A folded page torn from a notebook. It simply read, "The knock is for you now." I didn't show anyone. I didn't want to believe it, but every night after that, I heard faint knocking. Sometimes just one knock, sometimes 3. Sometimes it came from under my bed. I never told Tyler. I never told anyone. I just waited for summer to end, counting down the days until I could go home. When it finally did, I left my sleeping bag behind and never returned to that camp again. Years later, I looked up Camp Marrow Pines. It had closed down. No reason given. Just closed. Some say it was for financial reasons. Others said there were rumors of a missing camper, one no one remembered arriving. I don't know if that's true. I only know that cabin 3 is still there, decaying deeper into the woods, and sometimes, when I'm lying in bed, just as sleep begins to pull me under, I hear it again, that slow, steady knock, and I wonder if the door has locked itself again, this time from the inside.